This is a 20 by 30 canvas, and I'm using a 2-inch brush or some kind of large brush, and using burnt sienna and a bunch of water. I'm just brushing on kind of an underpainting, kind of an undertone. But before I get any further, I just want to show you a picture of the final painting so that you'll see where I'm heading with this video and this lesson. And so once that underpainting dries a little bit, maybe like 10 to 20 minutes, I started using a bigger brush, and I'm just sketching using burnt sienna again. You know, it's kind of a wash, that underpainting, so this is kind of watered down, just planning out the composition a bit, just kind of getting the structure of the painting and some of the main lines and areas of light and shadow, and just things to prepare me for the next stage of the painting. So I kind of, in the very beginning of my paintings, usually it's kind of formulaic. I kind of lay them out this way, and there's many different things you can do, but I just lay it out this way, kind of sketch it in, and then once that kind of dries, I'm using acrylic, so it dries fairly quickly. And for this painting, I actually did not use any retardants or any slow drying mediums or anything like that, so this is just regular acrylics, quick drying kind of acrylics. So now I'm working with large brushes on this painting mostly, like a number 12 or a number 10, and I think the smallest brush I use is like a number 8 or maybe a number 6. Because there's a lot of ground to cover in this painting, and this was my first large painting in a long time, probably 2 years. You know, I was doing a lot of still lifes recently, really small paintings like 8 by 6s, 8 by 10s, and this is a 20 by 30, as I said. So it's very different. It's a whole different world. So you'll see in this video a lot of experiments, just a lot of different things that I've tried. And I learned a lot. So anyway, this first stage here is kind of, I threw on the lights, and now I'm throwing in some of the dark shapes. So it's basically, I broke it down into light and dark shapes and certain things of that nature, and now I'm using a palette knife, kind of just experimenting here, seeing if I can get some interesting things going on in the foreground. And this is actually really crucial that I'm really glad that I used the palette knife and saw the effects I could get, because that will come into play later on in this painting when I'm going through a lot of trouble trying to figure things out. So in the beginning, I was planning on using this large brush, mostly the entire painting, and then finishing up with smaller strokes and little smaller variants, more towards the focal point of the painting and the trees and things at the top of the painting. And you know, I did this painting over 3 days and 3 painting sessions, and sometimes you just kind of lose that focus, and you'll see here in a few minutes that where I was really struggling with this foreground. And, you know, maybe it wasn't the best composition. There's a lot of things to consider when you're doing a painting and stuff. I was doing this from a photo that I took, so I didn't have a whole lot of information available to kind of change my composition or anything. But I enjoyed what I did, and I learned from it, so that's the good thing about it. So here I am, just throwing in more darks, just trying to get the canvas covered. And just trying to put down as much simplistic information as I can. You can see I'm kind of getting a little bit detailed there, but it's just adding variation and things. And like I said, I'm trying to use a big thick brush at the beginning, and try not to overpaint things too much, or overwork them. I mean, sometimes it happens and you can still have a good painting. You know, this one toward the end of the painting, you'll see I really did overwork some things, but um, I got it to a point where I was happy with, and that's the important thing. So, and keeping it looking fresh. Also, with a large painting like this, one of the main problems is using enough paint. Um, I wasn't really used to using a lot of paint, so I had to keep reminding myself, probably on the second or third day, I kept almost with every stroke, I just kept telling myself, use more paint, more paint. Just use a lot of paint. So that's what I was trying to get to. But in the beginning here, I was using a fair amount of paint, so I was getting some good, I was getting some good coverage going. But sometimes it was very small amounts of paint, and there's certain times when you use smaller amounts of paint and thicker amounts of paint. So now I'm trying to fill in the foreground with the light areas and figuring out those shadow shapes. The light was kind of shining down through the tree tops onto this pathway, but behind the trees and kind of where the focal points are, it was very, very misty and foggy, and it was really just an interesting kind of scene. So I wanted to capture those blues and oranges and just those kind of subtle effects. So that was kind of the concept I was going for. Whether it worked or not, it's always up for interpretation. So here I am just trying to, figure out the shapes, refine shapes. I'll probably make a separate video on painting from photographs and stuff because I have a lot to say on that. But something I will say is, at this point of the painting, I probably should have stopped looking at the photo reference, honestly. I should have gotten, some of the light holes that I'm doing right now, like through the trees, some of the main ones, and then just stopped looking at the photo reference. I kind of didn't stop looking at the photo reference until day 3 or day 2, and it took me a while to realize that I shouldn't be looking at it. I should be focused on creating an interesting painting that works instead of being a slave to the photograph. But I did finally realize that and start composing the painting a little bit more to my needs. So something to think about there. So as you can see there, I'm adding a lot of blue on the trees and stuff, and it just creates a lot of depth and a lot of misty type of effects and fogginess, and it just cools everything down, makes it recede, and then you can see the warm bits of the dark parts of the trees. It just comes forward, and then I have a little bit of transition showing some bluish type of greens there. Just a lot of nice harmony and a lot of great color going on. At least that's my goal. That's what I'm working for. So I kind of got frustrated with the foreground there, so I just started moving on to the trees and I just keep kind of jumping around the painting and refining things until until I can't refine them anymore, and then I move to another part of the painting and try to bring the standards up to the other parts of the painting and really just make it all come together as one. So adding in some little bit of light bits of grass there, which I will do multiple times, as you see, because I have to keep painting over it, and which happens. Like I said, this was my first largest painting in like 2 or 3 years, so it was really a different world for me. When you're used to painting really small paintings, this is a completely different world. So just trying to figure out some of the shadow shapes there in the trees. And the hard part about it is kind of the perspective of the trail, keeping that perspective that the trail is flat and still getting, you know, the light and the shadow shapes correct. That was really the biggest struggle for me. And of course, you'll see some parts of this that actually look okay. You know, and I thought some parts of it looked okay, and then I end up, I have to sacrifice those good parts and just paint over it because I needed to start fresh. So with this, I'm just constantly refining it, lightening things up that may be too dark. I kind of painted a lot of the dark areas too dark in the beginning, so I'm just lightening them up and just trying to figure things out for the most part. So working on the trees a little bit there, some darker color, lighter color, sky holes, just refining shapes and just little tiny bits of variation, because that's where I want the focus to be, is kind of on the trees and this path kind of leading you to them, and just the mistiness and the mystery with these trees and the pathway. With the light and everything. You know, the light and the shadow is kind of the main part of this. So that's kind of where I want most of the detail to appear. So I noticed a lot of that pathway, it's very light in value. And white, a lot of white added, and you can see there that it's just very gray. So I'm trying to add little bits of orange and browns in there, kind of bring up the color. And there was so much going on, so many different little branches and shadows and things, and that it was really tough. It starts looking like stones instead of one big pathway. So I think a lot of the darks may be too dark. So here I am trying to add some fresh color and really lighten things up and just make it come across correctly and make it read. So this is kind of what you'll see me struggling with for most of this video, but it's very important. I mean, this is how you learn. You learn from your mistakes, and you can see there I'm trying to lighten up some of the dark areas, throwing in some grays and other types of shadowy tones in there. Trying to separate that big mass of rock on the left from the trail. So that's a very important line to get. So it's very important, like, learning that, you know, you have to just keep pushing through it and try to visualize the finish. Visualize your finished painting, and that's what I was working with this entire time, and trying to remember my concept. And you know, some of these things, when you're just struggling, you get frustrated, you get upset, and you just lose focus of what your initial concept was in the very beginning, before you even started the painting. You forget what you were trying to capture. What is that essence? What drew you to the scene? So here I'm really like getting too detailed and too focused about it, and just struggling with that and getting the color to show. The other hard part is that the photograph I was using was kind of blown out, so the lights were lighter and the darks were really dark. So a lot of it I'm just making up on my own. You can see I'm lightening up all the shadow there, just trying to get some contrast and having more contrast toward the trees and such, and to focus, have the lightest light there and the darkest dark around the trees and not on the pathway. So a lot of it here now, I'm just starting over because I got so far into it. It's just a mess. It didn't read right. Um, so a lot of it's figuring out the movement of the painting and how the eye is going to travel down this road. And down in the very bottom there on the left, just left center a little bit, that little patch of brightness really stops you from kind of entering this painting. And but it was in the photograph, so I kept painting it back in. You can see I'm painting it there now. And then lighter bits at the top. But later on, you'll see me kind of tone down that part in the left. And it really helps the painting, helps you come into the painting a little better instead of just stopping at that light spot. So there, again, just trying a different way of painting in those shapes, a broad brush, starting out with a big brush and trying to figure out what's the best way to. So see there, I am toning it down. So what I was thinking is like trying to get kind of like a vignette type of effect. So kind of the center of the painting being the most lit around the trees and on the pathway, and then kind of the edges of the painting all around being darker. So when I toned down that little patch of brightness there, it just made sense to me. Also, that big light patch of light on the left, having it going off the painting like that, that's how the photograph was, but in the end you'll see that I actually tone that down a bit because it brings your eye right off the painting, and I don't want that. I want you to stay on the painting, stay in the painting. So it's just fixing these things and working with photographs and understanding what it, how you want your painting to come across. And I think the main reason this one was so difficult for me is because it's kind of a non-traditional type of landscape. See, there I am kind of toning that down and making it more of an oval shape. To keep your eye focused there instead of streaming right off the painting. But it's kind of a non-traditional landscape where everything is dark and there's just a few light patches instead of it being like the sky, showing the sky and a big lit up field or something. Most landscapes, at least in the general sense, are mostly light with little bits of shadow, and this is completely opposite. So it was very tough trying to figure these things out. And there I am working in that corner, kind of darkening that corner a little bit, which pushes your eye down to the lighter, the light bit of the mist there in the tree. It just brings you more toward the center, and that was my goal. That's where I wanted the focus to be. So I think at this point I really just kind of, for the most part, I wasn't looking at the photograph as much. I kind of figured out, okay, I need to modify these bits. Here I am again trying to paint in the light and shadow shapes of the pathway. And see, there's a lot of hard lines there, so I think that's part of the problem as well. A lot of light and a lot of hard lines. So it was just really troubling. See, I painted dark back over them again, trying to focus your eye. Just working with this focus and trying to figure it out. And getting frustrated once again, so starting over with the big brush and kind of getting the gradient of the pathway again. So this is what, the third time I've painted this pathway. I mean, I was really determined to get this painting to look right. I could have left out the trail altogether, or the thing was that I really needed to simplify these shapes, and I think in the end I kind of did that Could have been simplified maybe even more. But here's where I had an epiphany. I said, why don't I go back to the palette knife and get some nice texture? And I was able to get a really good mixture of this orange color, um, a lot of texture, and just very natural looking instead of flat color with a brush, overly mixed color. So with this palette knife, I'm able to just get a lot of natural looking shapes, natural looking colors. Um, you can see there I darkened it as I get toward the edges, like I said earlier. There's a big glare there because the paint's wet in the center of the painting, but you'll see that in a few minutes, what it really looks like. But I just get more of this natural looking shape. Now the problem with me using the palette knife is that I have to use the palette knife around the rest of the painting to make it work. Otherwise the painting doesn't look right. The rest of the painting is very smooth, not a lot of texture, and then I'm introducing all this texture on the path. So I kind of had to start using the palette knife. I started using that everywhere else. I started using it on these light patches that I'm painting in. I started using it on the trees, adding in some texture here and there. I go back and forth between the brush and the palette knife, and I kind of like that for larger paintings. Really adds just something different. That palette knife, it just creates these beautiful textures and colors and shapes that you just can't get with a brush for the most part. So I really enjoyed using that, and I think it helped tremendously. As you'll see here in the final, as I get toward the end of the painting, that it just worked, so that I stuck with that. And that's what this whole lesson is basically about, just experimenting, being determined, and to figure things out. Now, a lot of the paint I was using, it wasn't super duper thick. So I was able to paint over these layers, 3 or 4 times, and it wasn't that big of a deal. So sometimes if you're adding on really thick layers of paint, you probably don't want to keep painting over it. So that's the problem with acrylics. But usually a lot of people don't paint super thick like that. Anyway, just wanted to mention that. So there I am again using the palette knife, just getting in some texture, different kind of colors, and now it starts occurring to me what the color harmony of this painting is, which I should have known that from the very beginning. But it's these blues and oranges. It's really a complementary color scheme. I have these blues and oranges, and then I have the dark purples, and so really it's just the warms and the cools coming in. So there I am, adding some light green patches for the trees, and just a bunch of different subtle texture in the trees, and you'll see that on the close-up at the end when I do a close-up of the painting. But basically just a lot of different variation, and that really helps the painting come together, come to life. And looking at it now, I mean, the composition, I probably could have zoomed in even a little bit more and cut off part of the bottom of the pathway and part of the left side and the right side. I just kind of painted it more zoomed in. It would have been easier to deal with the path a little bit more. The perspective wouldn't have been as weird. But I still enjoy this painting. It's just seeing these things and taking it into account for future paintings. When I come into a similar situation, I can take what I've learned and say, okay, maybe if I zoom in a little bit more here, or maybe I zoom out. It just depends on what the situation is. So as you can see, just slowly building up areas, creating those sky holes in the trees, and creating some negative space shapes and all kinds of stuff, all kinds of variation on the trees. Um, some of the trees have just blues in them, purples, oranges, a lot of grays, some green, just different kind of texture and a lot of things going on. And I stayed kind of far back from my painting. I was probably 4 or 5 feet away every time. I would put down a few strokes and then kind of assess what needs to be worked on from here, and then step up a little closer, kind of like arm's length away from the painting, and just taking a good look at it. Sometimes I would go all the way back, 15, 20 feet across the room, and really look at it and see, is it reading correctly? What looks off about it? And sometimes I would take a break, for 20 minutes or an hour, and not look at it, and then look at it with some fresh eyes. And like I said, this painting took me 3 days, so I was able to, after the first day, the second day I could look at it with fresher eyes and say, wow, can't believe I didn't see that one mistake, or, I didn't see to fix that part up. So there's just a lot of different things you can see after looking at it after a few days. So I ended up spending a lot of time on the tree area because that's what I was really that's what I really enjoyed about this. Um, just that pathway in those trees with the mist behind it. I didn't spend a lot of time on the left on that rocky type of area. I did get the shape down and the value down and some variation in there, but I didn't want to spend a whole lot of time there. So refining some of the light areas again, trying to get those to read correctly. And sometimes most people make those way too bright. They're usually darker than like a big light area. They just read correctly when they're like a little bit darker. So be careful with that as well. So all those trees with those sky holes can be pretty tricky. So the main part is just dividing up the trees and then making it look as natural as possible, and getting a variety of shapes and getting really varied shapes, and not have a lot of repetition that looks so obvious and so man-made. It's really getting a natural kind of look down. And there you can see me again putting some thicker paint in the lighter patches, and as the painting goes on I just try to add thicker paint because when I get more confident about how it's going to look and what's coming across correctly, I'm just getting that figured out. Adding in some thicker paints and just some variety and stuff, and using that, adding some more texture around the painting to give it some harmony of texture, because it's really a natural looking scene, so really getting that texture to come across in the entire painting was my goal. So now I'm using a smaller brush, and you can see just jumping around the painting, adding in a little bit of some of that orange color on the path. I felt like this is when I stopped looking at the photograph, and I figured, you know, a lot of that light down on the shining down on the path, that bright light, would be reflecting up onto the trees and onto the rocks to the left. So I just added little bits of that bright orange, a little toned down, but I added that to the trees, and it just brought harmony to the entire painting. And you know, that's something to talk about and think about, is that when you use a little bit of color in one place, you kind of want to use it somewhere else in your painting as well. And it kind of brings everything together. You know, so like having just orange on the pathway, it doesn't really unite the whole painting. So when I added a little tiny bits of like reflected light onto the trees and around the painting, it brings everything together, it unifies it. So there I am struggling with that, the right side there, getting it the right value and getting it to come across a little better. Getting a kind of a natural tree shape in there, but still having it be dark and not really attract your attention as much. And there we go, darkening down that bit of light there. And working on the pathway just a little bit. Adding in those light bits of grass again, like I said I would do earlier. So right now it's just working on the details and bringing it to the final stage of the painting. Making sure I have the values all down, and you know, shadows where they need to be and lights where they need to be, and just small details, but not getting very detailed about it. Otherwise I think it would kind of kill the painting, because I have a lot of just very simplistic and implied kind of detail. You know, I kind of let your mind decide the detail and really fill in all the detail. So now I'm going to sign it, and I try to do that really as small as possible and not very I don't want to make it stand out, you know. So here's the finished painting, but you'll actually see after this, after I signed it and really looked at it, sometimes I'm quick to sign paintings and finish them, and then like a day later I'll see a few things that I need to fix, and that's what I'll do here. But here's a close-up of some of the details. I'm getting a lot of glare there, just a little bit. But you can see it's just a lot of variation, and I let your eye kind of fill in all of the detail and the story of it. So here I am fixing, lighting up a few things on the trail. I felt it was a little bit too dark, so just lighting up with a little bit of gray, purple type of colors. But anyway, that's about it. It's just these few final touches of things, and then that's the final painting. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Check out my other lessons if you haven't seen them yet. I do small paintings. There are some larger paintings I have. And like and subscribe if you wish to see more. I'd appreciate it. Thanks for watching, and don't give up. Stay determined. Keep on painting, and remember to have fun. Take care of yourself. Peace.